Take the $10,000, Claire. It's more than you deserve.
You shouldn't have hidden those millions, Lance.
Professor Whitaker, is that really you?
My husband leaned across the courtroom table and whispered, "Take the $10,000. It is more than you deserve." Then the doors opened. The judge saw the elderly man beside me, rose from the bench, and my husband's lawyer turned white. Full story. Hello. My name is Claire Fennett, and until 6 months ago, I believed my husband and I had built a successful life together. I was wrong. The life was real. The success was real. But the man beside me had been quietly removing my name from both. I met Lance Bennett when I was 28. At the time, I worked as an office manager for a small construction company in Columbus, Ohio. Lance was ambitious, charming, and always talking about the future. He did not have much money, but he had enough confidence for 2 people. On our 3rd date, he drew the design for a luxury kitchen on a paper napkin. He told me he would own a home renovation company one day. Not just any company, he said. The best one in the state. I believed him. More importantly, I believed in him. 2 years after we married, Lance started Bennett Heritage Homes from our spare bedroom. I gave him the $27,000 my grandmother had left me. I handled invoices at night, answered customer calls during lunch, and spent weekends driving to suppliers. When Lance needed good credit for the company's first vehicle, I signed the loan. For the first 5 years, we worked like partners. Then the business began making serious money, and Lance slowly stopped saying, "we." He hired accountants I never met. He changed the company passwords. He said the financial reports were too complicated and told me not to worry. Whenever I asked questions, he kissed my forehead and called me his anxious little bookkeeper. That nickname had once sounded playful. Eventually, it sounded like a warning. The first real crack appeared on our 12th wedding anniversary. Lance gave me a simple silver bracelet and said business had been slow. 2 days later, I found a receipt in his coat pocket for a $68,000 watch. When I confronted him, he laughed. "It belongs to a client," he said. I picked it up as a favor. I wanted to believe him, so I did. 3 months later, he announced that he wanted a divorce. He did it over breakfast as calmly as if he were changing a dinner reservation. "We have grown apart," he said. "There is no reason to make this ugly." Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a settlement agreement. Lance would keep the company, the house, the investment accounts, and every property connected to the business. I would receive $10,000 and my car, which still had 11 months of payments left. I stared at the number, certain I had missed a zero. 10,000, I asked. "The company is almost broke," he replied. "You should accept before creditors take everything." I looked at the man I had supported for 14 years. His face held no guilt, only impatience. "I helped build that company. You answered phones, Claire. Let us not rewrite history." That sentence hurt more than the divorce. I refused to sign. The next morning, I discovered that our joint checking account had been emptied. My credit card had been canceled. Even the emergency cash in our bedroom safe was gone. Lance had not asked for a divorce. He had planned a surrender. I hired a lawyer named Melissa Grant with money borrowed from my sister. Melissa was intelligent and hardworking, but after reviewing the records Lance had provided, she looked worried. According to those documents, Bennett Heritage Homes was drowning in debt. The house had 2 mortgages. The company owned no valuable equipment, and our investment account held less than $4,000. "Either your husband made terrible financial decisions," Melissa said, "or these records are incomplete." I knew Lance. He could be cruel, but he was not careless with money. So I began investigating. I searched old emails, tax folders, photographs, and every box Lance had ignored when he moved into his downtown apartment. I found nothing for 9 days. On the 10th night, I remembered a strange phone call from the previous summer. A woman had called asking for Mr. Bennett about insurance on a lake property. Lance had grabbed the phone from my hand and later claimed that she had the wrong number. I searched county property records throughout Ohio. Nothing appeared under Lance's name. Then I searched the names of his business managers. One name kept appearing: Red Cedar Holdings LLC. Red Cedar owned a lake house, 2 apartment buildings, and a warehouse used by Bennett Heritage Homes. Its official manager was Lance's college roommate, Evan Cole. I sent everything to Melissa. She issued subpoenas, but Evan claimed Red Cedar had no connection to my husband. Lance's lawyer, Victor Shaw, called my search a desperate fantasy. At the first hearing, Victor presented stacks of financial statements and spoke as though I were trying to rob a dying company. "Mrs. Bennett contributed no professional labor to the growth of this business," he said. "Now that it is failing, she wants money that does not exist." Lance sat behind him with a small smile. The judge allowed limited financial discovery, but we needed more than suspicion. We needed a path connecting Lance to the hidden assets. Then Melissa received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a copy of a wire transfer record. Bennett Heritage Homes had sent $800,000 to Red Cedar Holdings 18 months earlier. The payment was labeled materials reimbursement, but no materials were listed. There was also a handwritten note. Ask who taught Victor Shaw evidence law. Melissa read the note twice. Does that mean anything to you? I asked. She shook her head. Not yet. The next day, she searched old university records and found the answer. Victor Shaw had attended Franklin State Law School. His evidence professor had been a famous trial attorney turned teacher named Professor Samuel Whittaker. Whittaker had retired nearly 20 years earlier after exposing a judicial bribery scheme. Lawyers still discussed his closing arguments in training seminars. But he had vanished from public life after his wife died. Melissa located an address in a small town 90 minutes away. We drove there on a rainy Saturday. Professor Whittaker lived in a modest brick house with a blue door and an overgrown garden. When he answered, I saw a thin man in his late 70s wearing a brown sweater and holding a cup of tea. Professor Whittaker? Melissa asked. I stopped grading papers years ago, he replied. You may call me Sam. Melissa showed him the anonymous note. His expression changed when he saw Victor's name, but he invited us inside. Sam listened without interrupting as I described the marriage, the business, the false debts, and Red Cedar Holdings. When I finished, he asked one question. Do you want revenge, Mrs. Bennett, or do you want the truth? I thought they were the same thing, I said. He shook his head. Revenge is personal. Truth is patient. In a courtroom, patience wins. Sam agreed to review our evidence as a private consultant. He refused payment except for gas and black coffee. For 2 weeks, he studied every record. He noticed small inconsistencies that none of us had seen. Invoice numbers repeated. Equipment was supposedly sold before it was purchased. A company that billed Bennett Heritage Homes for consulting shared a mailing address with Victor Shaw's brother-in-law. Then Sam found the most important detail. One transfer authorization contained a digital signature timestamped at 2017 in the morning on a date when Lance claimed he had been hospitalized and unable to conduct business. The timestamp is not the key, Sam said. The device identification is. The transfer had been approved from a tablet registered to Lance. That tablet had connected through the Wi-Fi network at the lake house owned by Red Cedar. Lance had not merely known about the property. He had been using it while pretending to be sick. Melissa subpoenaed the internet records. Victor immediately tried to block the request. His aggressive reaction told Sam that we were close. Then something frightening happened. I returned home one evening and found my back door open. Nothing obvious had been stolen, but the box containing my old business files had been searched. On the kitchen counter was the silver bracelet Lance had given me on our anniversary. I had left it inside my bedroom drawer. Beside it was a note. Take the offer. The police could not prove who had entered. Lance denied everything and accused me of creating drama for the case. For one terrible hour, I considered giving up. $10,000 was insulting, but fear has a way of making insults look like exits. Sam came to my house after Melissa called him. He looked at the note and then at me. Courage does not mean you are not afraid, he said. It means fear does not get to sign your name. That night, I moved in with my sister and kept going. The internet company produced the records. Lance's tablet had connected to the lake house more than 60 times. The dates matched several major transfers from Bennett Heritage Homes to Red Cedar. We also discovered that Red Cedar's apartment buildings had been renovated by Lance's employees using company materials. The business had paid every expense while Evan held the properties on paper. The hidden assets were worth at least $6.4 million. But there was another surprise. Evan contacted Melissa and asked for immunity from civil claims in exchange for testimony. He said Lance had promised him 10% of Red Cedar's assets, then secretly prepared documents removing him as manager after the divorce. Even Lance's accomplice had learned what loyalty meant to him. Evan gave us emails, bank records, and recordings. One recording captured Lance laughing about the settlement. Claire will take the 10 grand, he said. She has never understood how money works. Victor's voice answered, make sure she never sees the Red Cedar ledgers. The night before the final hearing, Victor learned that Evan had changed sides. He called Melissa with a new offer, $750,000, provided I signed a confidentiality agreement and ended discovery immediately. For a few seconds, I could not breathe. It was more money than I had ever controlled. Sam remained silent. Melissa asked what I wanted to do. I remembered the empty bank account. I remembered the open back door. I remembered Lance saying I had only answered phones. No, I said. We'll go to court. The next morning, Lance waited outside the courtroom with Victor. Both wore expensive navy suits. When they saw Sam beside me, Lance laughed. "This is your secret weapon?" he asked. "A retired teacher." Victor studied Sam's face but did not recognize him immediately. Lance stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You are making a fool of yourself, Claire. Take the original 10,000. If you walk through those doors, I will make sure you leave with nothing." Sam looked at him calmly. "Young man," he said, "people who hide the truth often confuse silence with weakness." Lance rolled his eyes. "Save the classroom speech, Grandpa." Then the courtroom doors opened. We entered together. Judge Eleanor Price was reviewing a document when Sam walked down the aisle. She glanced up, froze, and slowly rose from the bench. The entire courtroom became silent. "Professor Whittaker," she said. Sam gave a small nod. "Good morning, Eleanor." Judge Price smiled with open respect. "This court owes much of its understanding of evidence to you, sir. It is an honor to see you again." Behind me, someone dropped a folder. It was Victor. His face had lost all its color. Sam had taught both Victor Shaw and Judge Price. But there was something we had not known. Victor had once faced expulsion for submitting altered evidence in Sam's class. Sam had allowed him to remain only after Victor admitted what he had done and promised never to compromise the truth again. Now Victor stood in a courtroom accused of helping a client hide millions through altered records. Judge Price made it clear that her respect for Sam would not affect her decisions. Every claim would still require admissible evidence. That was exactly what Sam wanted. Melissa began with the bank transfers. Then she introduced the property records, internet logs, invoices, and device data. Each item supported the next. There were no dramatic guesses, only a patient chain of facts. Victor objected repeatedly. Judge Price overruled some objections and sustained others. Sam never reacted. He simply passed Melissa a note whenever a better foundation was needed. Then Avon testified. He admitted that Red Cedar had been created to hold assets for Lance until the divorce was finished. He explained that Lance controlled every purchase and received all profits. He identified the emails and recordings. Victor attacked him as a liar seeking revenge. Evan looked directly at Lance. "I am a liar," he said. "That is why Mr. Bennett trusted me. But these records are real." Melissa played the recording of Lance discussing the $10,000 offer. Hearing his voice fill the courtroom was different from hearing it privately. Every laugh sounded colder. Every word showed how carefully he had planned to erase me from the life I helped create. Lance stopped smiling. Victor asked for a recess. Judge Price denied it. Then Melissa introduced an email Victor had sent to Lance. "Move remaining distributions before disclosure deadline. Use consulting classification. Destroy draft ledgers." Victor jumped to his feet and claimed the email was privileged. Sam quietly handed Melissa a legal citation. She explained that attorney-client privilege does not protect communications made to further fraud. Judge Price read the email, then looked at Victor for a long time. "Mr. Shaw," she said, "you may wish to retain independent counsel." Victor sat down so suddenly that his chair rolled backward. For the first time that day, Lance looked afraid. The final blow came from a forensic accountant. She testified that Lance had hidden $6.4 million in property and cash, understated the company's value by another $2.1 million, and created false debts to make me believe there was nothing to divide. Judge Price ruled that Lance had committed deliberate financial misconduct. She awarded me the marital home free of the fraudulent second mortgage, half the true value of the company, and 60% of the concealed assets as a penalty permitted under state law. Lance was also ordered to pay my legal and forensic costs. She referred the records involving Lance and Victor to the county prosecutor and the state bar. In total, my share was worth more than $5 million. But the money was not the moment I remember most. As we left the courtroom, Lance caught up to me near the elevators. His confidence was gone. "Claire, wait," he said. "We can still work something out." I turned around. For 14 years, I had waited for him. I had waited for his company to succeed, waited for him to come home, waited for him to treat me like a partner again. Now he was the one asking me to wait. I opened my purse and removed the unsigned settlement agreement he had first given me. The page still showed his generous offer of $10,000. I folded it once and placed it in his hand. "You were right about one thing," I said. "Someone in our marriage never understood how money worked." He stared at me. "Money can buy houses, watches, lawyers, and silence," I continued. "But it cannot buy back the person you betrayed after she finally learns her worth." The elevator doors opened. Sam and Melissa stepped inside with me. Lance remained in the hallway, holding the agreement like a receipt for everything he had lost. Months later, I sold the lake house and used part of the proceeds to create a legal aid fund for spouses facing hidden asset abuse. I named it the Whitaker Truth Project. Sam protested when I told him. I only helped you organize the evidence, he said. No, I replied. You reminded me that fear does not get to sign my name. Victor lost his law license while the criminal investigation continued. Lance's company was placed under court supervision, and several former employees came forward with more evidence. Avon accepted responsibility for his role and agreed to repay what he had received. As for me, I did not feel victorious every day. Justice does not erase betrayal. It simply prevents betrayal from writing the final chapter. I had entered that courtroom as a woman my husband believed could be bought for $10,000. I left knowing that my value had never been hidden in his accounts. He hid millions because he feared losing money. In the end, he lost something far more valuable. The woman who had once believed in him when he had nothing. And that is the truth. Lance could never move into a secret account. Memorable final line. He tried to bury my worth beneath millions of hidden dollars. But when the truth stood up in court, it was his perfect life that disappeared.